What's Trending with Tire Review. I'm Maddie Weiner. We're joined on the podcast by Neil Portnoy, Managing Director of Tire Sellout Data at GfK, and Dave Stevens, Vice President of POS Tracking at the company. GfK is a market research organization that collects data on a variety of industries and has collected tire sellout data from thousands of POS systems across the country since 2016. Neil and Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you.
So I know GfK has started compiling weekly tire sellout reports. To start, can you describe how your organization gets this data?
Sure, and that's a great way to start, Maddie. So we've done it the old-fashioned way. We went out and we met with tire dealers across the country, explaining to them the value proposition of sharing their sellout data with GfK. We've been fortunate enough to convince a lot of dealers across the country to share their sellout data with us. Once we got into a mode where we had data, we went out to places like the Clemson Tire Conference to present our data. We've been at the TAG meetings. We've been up to NETSA. We've been at dealer shows, distributor shows, just taking the word out there to make sure all dealers understand the value of having sellout data and being able to measure what is happening within the independent tire channel, which we are measuring. It's been a long road for us. We started this somewhere, I think, in 2016. So GfK has made a continued investment in this product. And today we are proud to say that we're reporting data monthly and nationally. And by the end of this year, we will be reporting data weekly and regionally, which is exactly what our tire dealers and the manufacturers have asked us to do.
That's very interesting. Now, using that data, using that weekly data, I'm curious, week to week, can you and Dave take me through a timeline of what passenger and light truck tire sellout has been like since mid-March when, tire dealers started to feel the economic effects of the coronavirus?
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. I just want to back up for a moment and turn the clock back to early March, because in early March, we were still reporting data on a monthly and national basis. But we started to feel that this COVID-19 was gonna be a big deal for not only the tire industry, but the country, and if you think about it, the rest of the world. So we started thinking about, the need to report data faster and with more frequency. So, Dave and I sat down and we worked with our operations team to create this, what we call the COVID-19 product. So we've been reporting weekly sellout for the last, I guess, for this whole year, and even being able to compare this year to last year. So the response we've gotten from this weekly data has been tremendous, and we feel really good about being able to serve the tire industry in this way.
No, that's great, and good to hear that. And going into that, weekly breakdown, can you share some data about, how tire sellout has changed since mid-March to now?
Yeah, so that's where I'll take over, Maddie, and thanks again, and thanks everyone for your time. So what we could let's start by kind of setting the stage here with what's been happening since we started the panel. And we started delivering this data back in 2016, and as you can see, I hope you can see that sales have been steadily declining since 2016. There are seasonal peaks. So Q4 is typically the strongest selling period within the independent tire dealer channel. That's what we're tracking. Where Q1 is typically slow, and things build up throughout the course of the year. That trend held true through 2019. What you see when you get to Q1 2020 is sales plummeting. They are at their lowest levels that we have recorded in any quarter since the beginning of 2016. Part of that, or a lot of that, we believe is COVID-19 related. When you talk about week to week sellout, what we're able to show, or what we do show, is that even in January, actually, I'm going to jump a little bit here, that even in January and February, comparing last year on a week-to-week basis, comparing 2020 to 2019, sales were lower. So it's as though the U.S. market in particular was anticipating some level of COVID impact, where things were approximately 10% below where they were on a week-to-week basis, even through January and February. Now, the week ending March 14th is when the president made his announcement that they were restricting travel from Europe. And that we denote as a key turning point in the cultural awareness and the mass population's awareness of what is happening with, or what was happening with COVID-19. And starting at that point, the week ending March 21st, the week ending March 28th, all of those weeks just plummeted. We saw 20-30% declines, where when we get to the week ending April 11th, so the beginning of April, there was a 45% decline year over year on average nationally. Since then, things have started to pick up. That week ending April 11th is when the stimulus checks started to be issued. And even anecdotally, talking to dealers, we see it in our data, we heard it from them, that things started to improve. So you start to see that the week over week, that instead of being down 40%, they were down 20%. And it continued to improve all the way up to 10% at the beginning of May. Some fluctuation since, but in the most recent weeks, we've seen again some pickup. Particularly, which I think was really interesting and really important, is that the week ending May 23rd, so about 2 weeks ago, we recorded, or we're seeing within our leader panel data, and again, this is just a subset of our thousands of shops, that leader panel data shows that it was the strongest week for overall sales in 2020. So that I don't know if that's necessarily surprising, just because sales do start to pick up into Q1 and Q2. But the fact that it took until May to really show and really want to highlight that particular point was a big deal. So that's how things have been going in recent weeks.
Very interesting. So, as I assume as states have started to open up, there's been this pickup for tire dealers, it seems like.
Yes. Yeah, and you start to see that, you're starting to see that trend overall. We're seeing it, if we go even further into some of the different segment type information, you do see that in the 18 plus rim diameter tires for non-light trucks. So that's your SUVs, your P-metric, Eurometric, hard metric tires, in the 18 plus rim diameter segment. They had an inverse correlation with in terms of share relative to the light truck tires. And what I mean by that is, when light truck tire share was going up because of the strength, because they were going on the essential vehicles, the Amazon delivery vans, those 18 plus rim diameter SUV tires were shrinking. Again, thinking it could be along the lines of white collar workers no longer needing to replace their tires in the immediate future because they're not commuting. They just decided to postpone their purchase. Well, in recent weeks, that share has steadily increased. While the light truck segment, that essential segment, has remained flat, that 18 plus rim diameter for the SUVs has slowly increased its share. So yes, it is becoming more important now that the states are beginning to open up and commuters are going back to work, and people are starting to think about going to restaurants again. So that's where it's at.
Very interesting. And it's interesting to look at the data and see those trends and see the spikes. And that's always, good news for our industry. I wanted to ask, you mentioned light truck tire sales in the 18 inch plus category. Were there any other bright spots that you could mention in the tire sellout data that you guys saw?
Well, that light truck as an overall segment, not restricted only to the 18 plus rim diameter, was a strength. And part of what we see, one of the elements that we highlighted is that there's a particular tire size, a 235, 75, 15. That particular tire size was relatively low ranking. I mean, everybody participating and listening to this podcast does understand that there's a lot of SKU proliferation out there, a lot of different items and sizes. this particular tire size ranked 25th in our data set over the period of time that we were looking at it. As soon as we started to see the impact of COVID-19, the performance of that tire in terms of sales units jumped all the way to number 14. So that was a big shift. Now, that particular tire goes on a lot of delivery vans, the Ford Econoline, the GMC Savannah, and a Dodge Ram, and another Chevy, and a Chevy van as well. Now, it also goes on older models of that. So the theory we have is that some of those vehicles were starting to be retired. They were starting to be taken off the road. But when this demand increased, what do you do to put an old vehicle on the road? You change the oil, you replace the tires, and off you go. So we think there was a spike in demand for that tire for that reason. So that type of specific element is pretty cool to see in the data. And more recently, there's a 265, 75, 16 that is showing a similar jump. It's jumped from the high teens to number 10 in the more recent weeks. So we're seeing some different tires having improved performance, particularly in that light truck space. But at a pure size level, it's the type of tire that fits that core delivery type vehicle.
Very interesting. So I wanted to know, you've presented a lot of data, and I'm sure there's this trend of increasing sellout will keep going up as time goes on, as states start to open their economies and recover from the economic effects of the coronavirus. But I was wondering, how do you all feel consumer buying behaviors, consumer buying preferences are changing during this time, and how will that affect tire sellout?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and the real answer is that nobody knows. I mean, we are really in uncharted territories. If we look at the sellout trends from 2016 to the first couple of months of this year, we could predict what was going to happen. But with 40 million Americans unemployed, with more than 105,000 people dead because of the virus, and now the protests that are having in more than 23 cities, we just don't know the effect that the pandemic will have in the next 2, 3, or 4 months, and that will have a potentially significant impact on the sellout of tires. We need to remember that the tire industry is part of the greater economy of the country. And while we are doing better than other industries, we still have a long way to go to get back to normal. And I think the big question that we always get when we're talking to industry leaders is, what will the quote unquote new normal look like, and when will it get here? And I don't think anybody really has the answer to that question. And I think it's so important to look at these weekly and monthly trends during the virus, so we can more easily predict where we think it might go, in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, so people can begin to plan. As far as behaviors go, everybody wants to go on vacation this summer, and we know that miles driven are down, but most of us don't want to get on airplanes to go on vacation. So hopefully we'll all be hopping in our cars like we did in the 70s and 80s, and take family vacations and begin to add more miles to those tires, and the need for replacement quicker. But honestly, Madeline, there are so many variables that are happening within the greater economy and within the country right now. It is difficult to predict where we're going to be in 3, 6, 9, 12 months.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Maddie. I just wanted to add a little bit to that, from the data perspective. And Neil's right. We really don't know, and we can't really. We can speculate on some things, and I'm actually going to do that now. Where when we look at some of our data, what we do see is that in the early weeks since the COVID impact really took effect, we've seen that the tier 4 group of tires has expanded its share of the units moved. So overall units is well down, and overall units, what we showed April to April, is down 25%. as a market overall. So overall units are down, but the share that makes up the tier 4 tires has increased. And traditionally what we've seen is that in Q1, that share of tier 4 tires is the highest that it will be at any point throughout in any quarter throughout the year. What we expect to see and what we're seeing, what we've seen in the April data and what we expect to see based on the weekly data we've produced for May is that Q2 will be this Q2 2020 will be the first time that we actually see tier 4 share be higher in Q2 than it was in Q1. And frankly, I think it'll probably max out in Q2. I think things are going to start to get back to normal. And I think that speaks to the consumer buying behavior. What we have seen based on prices is that they have remained relatively flat. And as manufacturers decide to change their prices and lower them in order to recapture that share, the tier shift the number of the sales by tier may change a little bit, but what we've seen so far is that there's a maximum price point, a target price point for consumers. So they're looking for that maximum value in a low cost tire. So rather than buying the quote unquote low end tier 3 price point, they're looking at the high end tier 4. So they're spending 85 to 90 a tire as opposed to 95 to 100 a tire. That seems to be what's happening right now. And with job security being so tenuous right now for so many, it seems to make that's our hypothesis, and it seems to make sense.
Very interesting. So larger tier 4 share, even in Q2, you're seeing. I wanted to know, do you think that will continue for Q3? You mentioned that, it may hit a high point, but, as consumers are trying to get their footing here, and especially with their finances, is there more to expect in terms of growth from the tier 4 segment this year, do you feel?
Using the data as a guide, and this is my personal opinion, this is not a forecast, it's just using the information we have available. This is my opinion on that. I think that tier 4 will start to decline again. It will probably get back to its traditional levels. Like I mentioned earlier, that 18 plus rim diameter for the SUV tires, the fact that the share of those units is continuing to increase in a market that is starting to grow again back to last year's levels, I expect that tier 4 share will start to decline. The way I like to think about it is that some of that 18 plus rim diameter is a result of white collar workers being able to work from home, no longer commuting. The reverse of that, or the converse of that, is that blue collar workers, and I think particularly of I'm fortunate enough to have an Instacart account and have had groceries delivered. The people driving, those delivery drivers, are driving typically older vehicles that require that are on probably their 4th or 5th replacement. They're not going to be looking at that tier 1 tire. So they've made their purchase now because they're still on the road. As things get back to what we might define as, or might consider, normal, we will see some more shifting back to the traditional weightings, the traditional shares by tier. But tier 4 will be a little bit, it'll be a little bit higher, but it won't be at the levels we see through April and May. Is just my educated guess on that.
No, sounds good. And like you guys said, we will definitely have to see. Well, I wanted to ask, for those in the industry interested in this data, how can they get in contact with GfK to receive these reports and additional insight from your organization?
Yeah, if you're a tire dealer out there and you're listening to this podcast, please reach out to Dave or myself. We'd love to talk to you about joining the panel. There is no cost to tire dealers to joining. And if you're a manufacturer, we'd love to talk to you guys also about subscribing to our data. Don't be shy. Reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you.
Great. Sounds good. Well, Dave and Neil, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you.